Welcome to week 6. Um, we are looking at chapter 28 this week, World War One and World War Two, two global wars, two total wars when all of society's resources are mobilized for the war effort. This might not sound all that new, but it was new, that you mobilize all of your society's industries for creating war. They even cut back on leisure activities, even on the opening of restaurants and bars late at night, even interventions into public media. All this was done in the effort of total war. And your textbook talks about the 3 pathways to modernity that really come out of the First World War. Constitutional democracy, well, that had been around for a while, but it's expanded after the war, especially to include women. And actually, in Germany, you have the creation after World War II of one of the most progressive constitutional governments in the world. This is before the seizure of power by the Nazis and Adolf Hitler, of course. So there's constitutional democracy, but then there's this other creation called fascism as well, created by Benito Mussolini in Italy, fascismo, fascists. This was a reference to Roman rule and Roman law. Fascists were actually sticks. He puts together this party all around ethnic nationalism. Your textbook talks about ethnic nationalism. Fascism is an extreme of ethnic nationalism, but that's the main idea that drove fascism. It's kind of racism, you could certainly say, because fascists believe their particular ethnic identity is the best, and that ethnic identity is the best way that a nation can come together. Hitler will build off of this, become a student of Mussolini, student in a metaphorical sense. He'll study, he'll read, he'll put together his own political movement. He'll call his group the National Socialist Workers' Party. They weren't really socialists, they were national socialists. They were national first, but they called themselves socialists to sort of cut into that political bed of support in working class communities for socialism. But the fascists, Mussolini, Hitler, they will create these movements that really are at their core anti-communists, right? So, which brings us to the third of these pathways to modernity, and that is communism. And specifically, we're mostly talking about Bolshevik communism, the kind of communism created in Russia during World War I, or I should say during the Russian Revolution, which occurs during World War I. So, Bolshevik communism, Vladimir Lenin returns to the Soviet Union, creates the communist Bolshevik party, and then seizes power in a coup d'etat. Then there's a civil war in Russia. The communists win that, of course, as well. And then they begin to try and build themselves a communist state, to collectivize industry, to abolish private property. This was the third of those pathways to modernity. When we say pathways to modernity, that means the ways in which nations or leaders in nations envisage themselves moving into the future. All of these groups, the democratic constitutional societies, the fascist societies, and the communist societies all realized that you needed to industrialize and to create a more and more effective economy, and even to move forward technologically into the modern era, into the future. But they had radically different visions on how they would achieve this, right? And then, of course, the Great Depression will hit in 1929. And that will make some of these ideologies, ethnic nationalism and communism, look even more attractive, because it seemed like during the Great Depression, the capitalist system was breaking down. It didn't work anymore. It needed to be revised. This is when the idea of corporatism, the corporatism was this idea of sharing, and Mussolini talks about corporatism and that as well in his movement. It just doesn't mean support for corporations. Corporatism means balancing governance between sort of the bureaucracy, the state itself, workers and their organizations, like unions, and private business. So it's like a three-legged stool that the economy works on: the state, unions, and private enterprise. That's what communists, well, that's what fascists, I should say, believed in. That you can get all three of those together, working together: the state, workers, and private business. Communists would say, no, 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 no. The state can run it all. The state can abolish private property, make everyone's incomes pretty much equal, get rid of the hierarchies in society, the haves and the have-nots, the exploitative class, get people working on cooperative farms together. That was the communist vision for how to move into the future. Those ideologies look a lot better during the Depression. 1929, the American stock market crashes in the United States, and then all of the countries put up these trade barriers. They in other words, they start putting up tariffs to try and protect their own countries from foreign competition. But it has the effect of cutting off global trade, making the Depression worse. And then we have the buildup of World War towards World War II during the latter years of the Depression, 1937, 38, 39. One way to think about this is to think about how the beginnings of each one of World War I and World War II are very distinct. World War I starts with the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand in the Balkans, and there's a lot of responsibility here for the war. Gavril Princip assassinates the Archduke, and he's actually working for a secret organization known as the Black Hand. He has nothing to do with the government of Serbia, really. So the country of Austria, of course, wants to blame this little country, this new country of Serbia, for the assassination of its leader. And then the alliance system kicks in. In other words, Austria is part of this alliance. And if Austria goes to war, then Germany and Italy are supposed to go to war with it. Look at that, that run up to the war. There's a lot of responsibility because there's a lot of enthusiasm for the war. There's very little resistance to the outbreak of World War I. Most people jump on the war bandwagon very quickly in all of these countries. Of course, we're not talking about the United States because they entered World War I very late, not until 1917. And then we compare and contrast the outbreak of World War I with the outbreak of World War II. World War I, yes, there was imperialism in that part of the Balkans, and Austria wants territory there. Serbia wants them out. Russia wants territory there. That had been all a result of the decline of the Ottoman Empire. Well, now in the beginning of World War II, it's a matter of German, Italian, and even Japanese aggression. People often forget that the World War II actually begins earlier in Asia in 1937 with the Japanese invasion of China. Uh, and then it begins in Europe with the German invasion of Poland in 1939 after appeasement failed with Hitler. Appeasement simply meant compromising with Hitler, but by the time that Hitler demanded what was known as the Sudetenland, you can read about this a little bit in your textbook, in Czechoslovakia. He takes the entire country of Czechoslovakia. People realize that negotiating with Hitler is a failing project, and instead they will begin to plan for war by 1939, and then indeed Hitler invades Poland in September, so on September 1st, actually, 1939, and 2 days later, Germany is at war with Britain and France, and World War II has begun. So very different wars as well in the way in which they're fought. World War One is a war of trench warfare, a war of attrition, almost a siege mentality, right? Not a lot of military intervention. All these new machines being put into the cause of war, such as poison gas and barbed wire, heavy artillery, more accurate artillery, airplanes, the first aerial bombing of cities during World War One, but not on a massive scale. World War II will be a mobile war. It will be a war of blitzkrieg, which means lightning war. Special forces combined with air power, right? This is what defines World War II. And the war is only brought to an end, of course, in Asia by the dropping of the atomic bombs. So that strikes on some of the themes we're talking about this week. There's a lot in this chapter. Please log into the discussion where I want to talk about ethnic nationalism, communism, and democratic constitutionalism. Okay, I will see you all online. Have a good one.